Well, I kind of wish I had gotten coffee before I started. Oh well. Yes, okay. That's what it says. Okay. Yep. Yep. Well, this is my target. 529 was my first target. I thought we would probably stop here. Hey, yeah, big day. I'll try to keep my enthusiasm down, but I'm very happy. That volume, yep. So I'm happy because, yeah, like there was just a lot that pointed to this range being good, and I'm happy that we got it right. So there's an element of like, there's always an element of kind of like ego when you're right about something. But I think that for us, we've been looking at this for a long time. And I've been looking at it for a long time. And this downward motion here kind of felt like we cracked it in time, and we had plenty of time, you know. Now, the jump did not happen in a visible way. Like, it didn't happen where you could see that move across. It just happened in that after hours price action. So it really was a trap. And I think that this is obviously a huge move. It's up 75% today. I don't pretend like that's completely normal, okay? So like what happened in after hours price movement, really most of it's pre-market here is what it looks like. It can't be understated. Like it has to be like understood as normally this is the kind of move that you would normally see during regular trading hours. So for us to have this kind of a move in after hours or non-regular trading hours is pretty substantial. It's a big deal. It's definitely a tactic, and it's one that really messes with shorts because shorts saw that hook. They saw that double top, and they were reading that thinking that it might be distributive. And I looked at it and said, well, yeah, I mean, it is until it isn't, right? And you really don't know until you get that move, and then you get that support over 320. So in some ways, was it effective? Yeah. But remember, and I don't know if you guys remember this at all, you may not, we drew it out, and I don't have a really good frame of reference. It's not here right now. I don't know where it went. But we drew it out, and I had drawn out that if this was a spring, that what you could see locally, and I think I was pretty close, is that it would come down and then find support again back above and jump this creek. And that's pretty much what happened. Like, it happened in a lot longer of a time frame where it pushed over again, like it was like end of the day Friday. It pushed over and then it came back down. There really wasn't much else to say on Friday. I didn't know if we were going to see this kind of a move Monday morning, and I definitely was not expecting it to just jump the creek pre-market, huge amount of volume, and just race up. I had made a commitment to go to do some kung fu today, and my friend was testing, so I didn't want to stick around in the morning just because, you know, the stock's running. But when I left, I kind of thought to myself, well, it needs to come back down to the 320, remember? And I told the Discord group, that was kind of like my big thing, was like, hey, what are we looking at when we're talking about a continuation of the run? And I said, just really need to find support over 320, and then we should be good to go. And when you're looking at a squeezing motion, there's not really an easy way to, there's just not. There's no easy way to kind of figure in exactly where you're going to be at what time. All I could tell you at that moment was that you have levels that are either going to provide resistance or provide support, and then that's it. Sorry, I got sidetracked. I was reading something. Discord kind of blew up while I was gone, and I really haven't read much on there. Yeah, so let's see. Yeah, I said 330. I think I misspoke. My chart, it says 330 on this one, and then it says 320 on this one. Doesn't really matter. Did it get support there? Yes. Came pretty low. It actually came down to 317, 315, which was that liquid middle. So my thought was if we came back and found support here, we'd be good, and that's where we found support right at 320, 322, 321, and then rocketed up from there. Jumped another creek here is what it looks like. And these are going to be really steep, dramatic pullbacks here and there when you're on these kind of squeezing motions. So our first levels that we marked off were the 4-hour 180 intersect. So that's right where we are right here at 528. I said I thought we would probably get there at that point. So this is a very cool day to be streaming because we're up 84%. Is pretty unusual. It hasn't been like this for a long time. So when I look at this, I'm like, okay, well, when's it going to stop? Clearly it's going parabolic here. Clearly you've got a bit of an M cross in the middle, but that's really just an M cross at 375. And I would argue that that's probably just this top. Now it's not hitting like the markers perfectly. I think a lot of it's just this volume is going crazy, probably with some shorts covering. Getting pulled. You got to imagine like this is a months old position now. This is January to now. This is a very long-term position if you're a short, and everything from the beginning of the year is just been erased for the short. So any kind of a holding game that was being played is gone from a shorts perspective. So everything back to January at this point is game for coverage. And we thought that probably the 4-hour intersect was going to be the big one that we stop at midway. And then the daily doesn't intersect until much higher, which is up near 880. So I don't actually have a lot of stopping levels. I know that some people are looking at gaps. I think 633, kind of where we are right now, and then 633 is another one. These are the ones I have marked off. And then way up here around 880. Because if it manages to find support above the 4-hour and not just test it and drop, which it's done that before, it's not like it has to go above it, right? It almost never goes above it unless we're in a real big upswing. 86% is enough for you, Booksy? Well, yeah. It's enough for me to say like, this kind of price action right here definitely happened. This is what we wanted to have happen. We wanted to see it push up and break out of this creek that we've been stuck under on this kind of downward, I would call it the latter half of an S-curve. Now, based on the way this broke out, there's two ways I could measure this breakout. One would be to break out from the bottom, which I already have a price target for it. And my price target's pretty high. It's up here at 1562. That might be a little too high for some people's taste, but that's where I see it going if the price target holds. And I think it's probably the more reliable target. The other one is a break from where we actually jumped the creek or where the breakout actually happened. Either one is fine. And that would get you a target up here around 21. It's not that that's wrong. I think it's probably fine to say like either one because they're both pretty high up. But the reason I would only use that one is because the lower one is just because it's a more conservative target, and then everything else is sort of whatever. The whole point of us anticipating a trade like this happening is that we have hopefully some positions. And so you're going to be wanting to think about, well, where do I want to go with this position? Look, I think the natural place to kind of have most concern will be around this 1190 because that's where we had a pretty strong resistance built and it's the previous floor. So probably the most, and I'm going to switch off the 1 minute because I need to use the full chart. Probably the most telling place for us is going to be that 1190 if we get there. I know I just said two other things. I think those are like stopping points that you have to jump because of, for technical reasons, you're going to have a lot of sellers there. So one of them, I said we might get to the 4-hour 180 intersect. I'm going to move this stuff way out of the way. And remember, this is the diagram I was using, and my goodness, if it's not pretty much exactly what happened here with the LPS and the breakout. I've been so concerned about the possibility of a spring that the idea of it not coming much lower and the idea of it hitting 304 and having a change of character, which is what we wrote, just seems so out there to me. Like, that's such a crazy way to do it. But this is pretty much exactly what I'm looking for now. So if we're going to like measure the move or do whatever, we would want to use these trajectories as a guidepost. Frankly, again, I think we may not really get much of a stop until we hit like that 11 to 13 area. I think it's very possible that most of this is pretty uphill, if you will. I would have expected us to stop here, though, like right around 5. And a shout out to Glenn, who's probably not with us today, but thankfully he was wrong about not being at 5 again till October. Thankfully he was wrong because if he was right, I would be wrong. And there's always somebody on the other side of the trade. So just keep that in mind. I'm not gonna sit here and like bash other people though. It was just thought occurred to me that, man, I'm kind of glad he was wrong in this case, because if he was right, we would be in for it, It's a really long time. So, but yeah, I'm not going to comment on other people. So if you have questions about other people's downward targets or whatever, I don't know how they got those targets. And so I'm not going to comment on it. I had one downward target at 167, and then everything else I thought was looking really good. You don't have to take my word for it. You can go back, look at the streams that I just did recently. I felt like this range was distinctly different from the previous two, which is a good thing. And that's the thing is like, you don't have to be highly proficient. You don't have to be like the best trader ever to do comparisons like that. Like the comparisons we did were so rudimentary, We did a comparison and talked about how this was sitting up and there a lot of trading was happening in the upper 50%. That's rudimentary. I mean, that's some of the most basic stuff. Yes, it's set up in some ways similar to the others, but then there were these really distinct differences in the volume, and there were distinct differences in what happened after that hook. That was really important on Thursday, the drop and then the hook. And, I was encouraging folks as best I could. Sometimes I think I put in the Discord, sometimes you need to drop before you go up. Like don't count it out just because we came down first. It happens, and we got the change of character we needed. I think at lowest it ended up going to like what? 291, I mean, it's funny how these numbers, they keep coming back around, So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and like loosen up this range. I'm not going to go back and keep talking about the same things over and over again. I think that it served us well to mark off the range the way we did with the 50% guides. Everything else here looks like it was satisfied. It's kind of moved on. We got the pullback to 330-ish. It was really like 315. We found the support. We didn't end up coming as low as 284 ever. We didn't ever come back down here. We didn't get the 276, but that's okay because it went into the S-curve and then it stopped doing the S-curve. We analyzed that on stream. So we were done with that. You throw it out the window if it's not happening. And then you look at what's possible. So this is the marker I had. This has been on my chart for a little while. And it's specifically supposed to be marking off a top area here. So it's hit my target. So like I'm really satisfied right now. I'm feeling really good. Not only did it hit it, it kind of hit like right where, timing wise, it's only like a day off. That's pretty solid. And I've talked about a few different times that you have to, so it should be this bottom and then this bottom. There is a hook, but the hook doesn't quite come up as much. There we go. So I've talked a lot about these kind of trajectory marks and how when you squeeze, you will hit them. When you like get the breakout, you will hit them. But you have to keep in mind, like this is the first one that's worked in a little while because the previous one did not work, you know. Like no matter how you draw it up here, we didn't get a reactive move back up. That was when like we were expecting to come back up to 9. Remember that? And I was saying, well, we might come back up to 9. And then it broke down at the end. So I'm repeating that because I think it's an evidence of you can have a technique that's correct, but it doesn't always work. Like just because the methodology is solid doesn't mean it's always going to play out. And it hasn't always played out. But at least for now, I'm like, okay, well, that methodology, that thinking was correct. And I know it's correct. Like I've seen it happen, but it's hard when you're like thinking about stuff in the future. And then also these trajectories. So I've got a couple different ones on here. I think we were using this guy. This is a 44-degree trajectory. And then this one is also, this is 39. So the other one was the steeper one. I'm trying to remember why I drew this one. Maybe it was just because it hit that bottom. So these trajectories were like estimates of when, if we hit the middle here, where would we maybe come up to? So I don't think that they are completely wrong, but I do think that they probably just haven't played out completely yet. So I'm going to keep in mind that this trajectory could still be something we revisit. And you have to remember, like, just because we're moving right now and it's a super awesome big move, does not mean we're not going to have some substantial midway time. The same things happened, you know, in January. We had some really gnarly pullbacks at that time. And then after that, you all remember it took like 3 months before we had the second huge advancement. So long term, what am I thinking? It's appropriate to revisit it. And I mentioned earlier, this is where I'm getting this target from. I think this is the move we're kind of recreating right now. So if you don't know where I'm going with that, this is 47.50, what is it? 47.19 down to 707. Could be percentage based, could be dollar based, but I think it's better just to do the percentage based box and drag it down. And that's what I'm using down here. Why am I using that? Because this is, if you've not been kind of in attendance, it might be a little confusing. So I don't want to waste too much time with like the nitty gritty of it, but this downward pressure is a lot like what we see on the micro when it finishes a shallow S-curve. So what I'm showing you right here is a reactive move, a walk up after it finishes like the shallow S-curve. And that first move, usually, if you do it according to some of my own methodology, is this first drop. Or it's very similar to it. So my thought is that I probably get a measure from the bottom, and that to me looks correct. So that looks like a move all the way up to 1592. Why would I think that's correct? Probably, again, instead of it breaking from here up, I'm using that, oh, I picked the wrong thing, as a way of being a little bit more conservative about it. And it's an estimation, it's not like exact. But here's part of the reason why I think that's probably right, is if you look at the angle of this descent and the angle of this descent, you can think about it like a channel. And if I were traveling from top of the channel to bottom of the channel and then bottom of the channel to top of the channel, that makes a little bit more sense than dragging this price target out to the breakout point. Doesn't mean we won't get there eventually. I just think that it's a better conservative target. So think about it like 2 channel lines going down. The other reason that I like it is because it goes back to what I think is kind of like a historic point. And I'm not sure I'm like 100% on this, so I might be a little bit off. And we'll look at the nitty gritty in just a second. We're at 530, 82% up. So nobody should be worried about the move. The move is going. But I think nitty gritty wise, it's like the day after. You can see right here. Look at where that price target is. So we've now measured like a full length, like a full measured move away. If you're taking this as your measured move, right? And assuming this is almost likened to a channel move where you're going from top to bottom, and then again, you're going to go from bottom to top. This is the move, right? After this S curve, which is a lot of accumulation. You're going to skip over a lot of this stuff because you've already done it. And that's what I think we're seeing right now is we're skipping over different ranges because we've already traded them. And then look at where those original gaps are. One is at 1350. And then if you look just behind that, this next gap is the day that we had the reverse split. And you can tell that this price target is really close to that opening price here, which I believe it opens at 1630. So I think I'm on the right track because there's a lot of very simple mathematics here that's telling me that, yeah, that sort of makes sense. So you would want to come back and retest 11 because that's the previous floor historically at this point, if you go back and look at the full-time chart. And then also you would come back up to the place at which all of this gunk started, this huge S-curve started. And that's what we see in the example that I showed. Even though it might look like it takes a really long time, it still gets up there. And where it's going is ultimately goes back to here. And it's going back to, this is just an example, but you can see like this is a huge breakout motion way down the line. And then it starts taking off. And I'm using this blue line as a guide. It just happens to be in the right place on the chart. But you can see like that's the way it's structured. Because ultimately, like, it's made the move down. It's gotten as much liquidity. They've accumulated as much as they can. And then you're moving out. You got like a 50-50 here, S-curve, that breaks to the top. Then you come back down and find support, do a backup. Then you really break out and go. And that's where it happens. Is like kind of the original stopping point of the move. And that for us, arguably could be this guy at like maybe 1380. Or you could say it's even this little tiny hook above at 1486. Or you could just say, hey, let's just keep it simple. Let's put it right at the reverse split value. It doesn't really matter to me, but I would say that whole area is the target. And I feel like it's kind of a given when you look at the big picture. You're like, oh yeah, it would make complete and total sense that if we've already traded this whole area and we're squeezing through it, any shorts that were just kind of piling in are going to be getting out all the way up to that point. And then you're going to have to see really bulls take over. So how fast can we expect this thing to move? Honestly, like I was saying before, I think that the EMAs are going to play a big part in it. Right now, we're like pushing way above. We're at 550. We've pushed way above that 4 hour. And that was my first big intersect point, was like right there. So I thought we might come back down and retest this creek. So much like what we saw this morning with that really steep pullback to 320, which we needed, and I'm glad we did it because now it's done. We got that check. I don't really love the gap there, but whatever. We got the test on 330, 320. It was really like I said, 315 up to 320. My other chart said 320. I don't know why I put 330 on this one. Whatever. This is another one I think will be pretty important. This is a rotational line. And I think the back test to 436 might happen. I can't guarantee that one because it's sort of like a where we find support is where we find support kind of thing. Like this was my target, the 529, but beyond that, it's sort of like, well, if you get above that considerably, you might just use that as a support, you know? and I could be wrong about it stopping here and going back down to like 440. But we got to be realistic at the same time. You know, a pullback tomorrow morning of 20% after running 90, 100% is not a big deal. So how do you feel about the aftermarket with the dilution still at 250 million left? Look, I mean, I'm not saying they can't do it. But right now, whoever's operating this thing, look at the volume. I mean, they're pulling a short squeeze. So there's no stopping it now, you know. If they decide they want to finish the offering at a higher price, then it's their prerogative. AMC can offer wherever they want to offer, you know. Somebody says there's only 30 million shares left in the offering. Right. So if they're getting like $2 more per share for the offering, then whoever's getting less, I'm sorry, if the offering is money, so I got that backwards. If the offering is a certain allocated amount of money, then they're offering them at higher prices. That's going to help drive the price up because whoever's getting that at $4 or $5 is going to want the price to go above $4 or $5. If it were an equity swap, it would be a little different because it'd be like, obviously you could get more. Does that make sense? I'm not a huge debt guy, so if I'm getting that kind of backwards, sorry, but yeah. I don't feel that it would make any substantial difference at this point. Now, it could be that when the offering is completed, we get a pullback because that happens sometimes. And then you get whoever's got the offering sometimes will sell, especially if it's been running. So anyways, if I were going to pick out a hot zone for possible places of stopping, I'm not sure why I have that as low as I do. That should be at 70 or 650, not 633. I would say between 650 and 530 right now. So these are like little pockets in my brain. Like maybe right here that we might see the need for some consolidation. With a move this large, you have to keep in mind that really any kind of fib retracement down to 50% is possible. So let's say, for example, they do want to go back down to 436. They could take this as high up as 660. And that kind of makes sense because then you hit that 660, 650 wall. And then look at where that 50% retrace is. It's all the way back down to 433. So that's kind of right where you'd want to be if you're trying to retest that break and maybe the 4 hour. So 650 might be a reasonable top. It makes sense to me as one. Like, okay, that's a logical place to maybe hit the brakes. 582 is a fib level. There you go. There's another one. I mean, we can find a bunch. So I think for most people, if they're trading this, you're looking for that volatility to go up and you're trying to avoid the crush. If you've got shares, yeah, like you could exit some positions, I guess, on a high, but for the most part, this move is just getting started if you've got a share position. If you're just in a share position, you're probably waiting long term to see if we're going to get to this target that I've got on here, which is like 15 or whatever. I don't personally can't tell you what to do, but I could say that, yeah, that to me makes way more sense to just chill out and wait if you're in a share position, share only position. If you're in a call position and you've got leaps, I don't personally think there's anything wrong with taking stuff off the table when you're up 100% on the day. Any other stock in the market, if you were up 100%, I would be like, okay, well, why are you still holding on? What do you want? You know what I mean? What do you really want from that? Because that's a lot of money to be playing with and assume that it's going to keep going. Like my calls today are up 324%. So I have I invested a small amount. I bought a dozen calls. And for them to be up 300+%, that's a huge deal. I'm making my targets for like 2 or 3 weeks out if that's my goal. So my MPW calls, by the way, I know you guys are less excited about that, but my MPW $10 calls are up 100% today. So I'm doing well today. I feel good about today. IWM is back up 100%. My GameStop, I told you guys I bought GameStop right here. I bought it at like kind of a bad price, to be honest. But I know a lot of people are going to be like, why didn't you buy it on here? Because I didn't know what was going to happen. If I bought every single breakout, some of them would be good, some wouldn't be good. But for GME, I bought down at, on this pullback, let's see, it was consolidating. It was probably right around here. I think it's like 16 to 18 is where I bought like a bunch of stuff because it broke out. And then really it was on this one that I put more in. So yeah, I didn't get a great deal. I bought here at like 17.50, but that doesn't matter. I'm still up like 75% on shares, and a share position being up that high is ridiculous in the grand scheme of things. So yeah, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like, oh, it has to keep going forever, but they are really high targets. I think GameStop has the ability here, if it continues, to go up to like $85. That's from a technical breakout. That's not even me just like wishful thinking. That's a Bolkowski wedge breakout. And it makes sense because it's a previous top from way back near the original squeeze at 85. So do I think it can get all the way up there? Yeah. Do I think it has to get up there? No. So I have to decide what, in terms of profit, like what are you trying to achieve? You know what I mean? If your goal has already been met, figure out a way to take some off the table. Me, like my AMC goals with these leaps really has already been met. I wasn't expecting it to make one giant leg all the way up to 13. I think we're going to get at least, if it's let's say, for example, let's say the move is going to be up to here. Let's say it will go to 1570. I think $6.13, this 650, that's the 50% mark. That still makes a lot of sense to me. So like maybe we break out and go to 7 something and then we come back down, or maybe we do a deeper retracement. There's no telling. Tomorrow, some of y'all are saying, well, what about pullbacks? Look, the most you could do any given day, I'm just going to tell you right now, the most I'm going to be able to do for you any given day here is estimate where it might stop based on what we know about levels. But then from that point forward, there's really nothing I can do. No technical person is going to be able to call out every single backup. You can look at orders, the order flow. You can look at the buy and sell orders and see where they're coming in. You can see if that floor is rising. That's going to be pretty helpful. I don't look at indicators like that on the stream, but you can. So find those. And then from there on, I would just look at support and resistance levels. Like I said, I don't think that there's anything you could do except maybe do at the end of the day, come back here and say, all right, well, we had one day where we went up 100%. Where's the 50% retrace? Okay, it's here at 430. That's kind of what I'm thinking. If we had a big pullback, it'd be right around here. Because again, I think that this is a reasonable place. And we did stop there, by the way. We chopped right around 430. Really was 436. Let's see what happened there at 436. So, yeah. So did it respect those levels? Yeah, it did. It did break out. It found support ultimately here at like 426 and then took off. But I'm not seeing any major retrace down. I don't see any checks on it. So, yeah, again, maybe right here then. You say 427. You can look at that as a 50% retrace on the move today. If it just stopped going all of a sudden today, that's where we would say it is. This is ridiculous amounts of volume. So it's kind of like there's gonna be like people that'll play on your emotions and say like, hey, it's gonna just keep going forever. I'm not gonna do that. I don't think it will keep going forever. I think it's gonna go pretty far. Like my estimation is that, again, this little pocket area around 650, maybe like a halfway point. We might see some consolidation here. And if we don't, it could be like January where we make a blast up to 15 and then drop really far in like a huge retracement. Remember, like that January to February move was like a humongous drop. It was like a 50% drop. So I think it was more actually, depending on how you measure it. But that's a big drop. So I'm like, if we went up to, let's say 15 something, and then it would not be nearly impossible for us to then suddenly drop down to 6. So I'm not interested in like gambling here with those kinds of things. I think the best thing to do, and I'm not looking at RSI, but I guess you could. On the higher time frames, I think it'd be okay, but it's probably blown out anyways. So it's like, who cares, at that point. Yeah, I think the best thing you can do is just look at sort of common sense retracements. So my first upper target was this guy. It was this intersection right here at 536. My second upper target is a little different, and I think it's a little bit trickier because I think I'm thinking the best way to do it is going to be to use this as a measuring point, the original drop here as a measuring point for that squeeze. I think it's going to be roughly right above this daily. If we don't get above the daily, there's no bigger movement. So right now, where we're at on the daily is 1072. And historically, there's never been a massive move on AMC, like a really massive one, without those first two jumps. So one is over the 4 hour, which we technically we're above it now. And the other is the daily. And so right now the daily is at 1065. So, if you bonk your head on the daily and you get trapped there, it could be the end of the run. I'm not trying to be like a downer. I'm just saying that's possible. And yeah, there's a ton of other areas that we could stop. I haven't really looked at the weekly yet. Not for a little while. RSI, I mean. Yeah, okay. So here's a case for making a case that we don't go any farther. So I could make a strong enough case right now that this particular trend, you see that drop on RSI on the weekly? Y'all may not be able to see that, but RSI went from, when we made the big drop, went from like 44, it dropped down to 26, right? And then we took off today from like 25. And it did, if you notice here, it did check those marks on the way out of that jump. So I've been talking about how this is sort of the natural result. If you're talking about price movement, that particular spot on that drop, price-wise and RSI-wise, would probably echo each other, and then that would be the target. So you can make a case right now that this is already crossed over and it's already hitting the intended target. You see this? Because like, look at the intersection here. There's a drive down, and these are making lower highs, right, at a particular angle down. And then this is making higher lows at a particular angle up, and then it's broken. This would be your S-curve. This would be your sine wave, right? You can make a case that that is the intended top for RSI, and that RSI would then capitulate back down until you get to a bottom again and come back up. So I could easily sit here and make an argument that this is as high as we go based on just that. But price target wise, I don't think that it's the end of it. And so therefore I could just look at this and say, well, this is just RSI, it's reacting to price. We may get a pullback here, to chill out the RSI. We may not. You go back to previous runs, probably helpful. But yeah, I mean, you can see that like after coming from historic lows, that was the March move. We had a substantially huge push up, but then ultimately it came back down again. And RSI never changed. Like it continually went up. And that's what I think a big part of the massive moves that we had is that this was a massive divergence. So at this point, when I look at where we are now, we don't really have that. We have a shallow S-curve into a bottom. So sure, like I think you could make the argument that like ultimately this is going to top off lower than expected, you know, right around like 590 or 6, and then drop back down, and you'd end up, you know, forming some kind of a bouncing bottom. I don't think that would be wrong to anticipate something like that as possible. Volume right now is definitely substantial, and that's maybe where you could make an argument that that's not happening, is you got historically high volume right now. You know, this is likened to the volume that we had in the January squeeze right now. At least according to this chart, it's pretty much at or above that level. But notice, like, it's at or above that level, but we haven't made like the gains. So there's kind of a question in my mind of like, where is the, why is the price then not way up higher, right, already? And that question is usually answered by thinking about buying and selling. And there must be a lot of selling going on, you know, in addition to the buying. So for volume to be as high as it is and not be, and not price not be higher. So let's take a look. I'm going to look really quickly at this move. So we're back to 88%. We were at about 100%. Now we're back to 88. It did have a steep pullback, but it's nothing to be like super concerned about just yet. I don't think any of the trends were broken. This is the outermost trend I can draw, so that would be the one I would use right now. Doesn't mean that if it drops, it's going to forever drop. Just means that it's no longer uptrending. That parabola kind of throws me off, but I imagine it could make a move about the same size as this guy. So that might be what the measurement's based on. Yep. See that? So you see how this initial move down here kind of defines the outside of it, and then it came back to the top, and now we're hitting a rejection again. So we could make a move all the way back down to like 5 by end of day and just kind of sit on it. All right, so like this volume builds real gradually too. It's strange. So you go back and look at it. It's not even like high volume until, shoot, that's like, well, that was when it exploded, right? After the week of the 19th. So yeah, this volume builds and then it has that big day, and that big day ended up being 400%. That's crazy. Well, that week, I mean, ended up being, it's not a day. That week ended up being like 400%. We're already at that volume level. Is that right? Yeah, that's what the chart says. We're actually higher than that volume level. We do have a buildup. It's red volume. Not that that's a huge deal, but those are like down weeks. And yeah, so it does build out. It may have been just more gradual because of the way this was forming on a downtrend. But that's a larger amount of volume, supposedly, in one day than we had in that week in January. That seems out there, because this has only been a day. I don't want to make that claim and then be like completely wrong, but that's what I'm showing on my chart. That's what it says. Like, yeah. Because that was a weekly candle right there. And I'm not sure what to make of that. There's just that many more people in the play. I mean, and the other thing is, if you look back, look at all this volume in this downside. I mean, all of that volume is going to be played back out if this is indeed a squeezing moment, because all of that volume will be covered, will have to be covered. And it's not all down, so it's unwise to say that. A lot of it's been traded sideways. That's a lot of buying and selling. But all that downward volume will be given back in a short squeeze. So just those straight bars down where there's very little resistance, but they're high volume bars, like this guy, this big drop, like that's going to come back in a covering action for buying back shares. So, yeah. I'm thinking right where we're at, probably a good place to park it for the stock, the health of the stock. It wouldn't be bad. You know, if we opened tomorrow and we were down like 50%, it's kind of like whatever. I mean, like I said, 427 could end up being like a pretty important point for us. Honestly, this bottom is pretty wide, and in times of like massive upturns, you don't usually come all the way back down. But for longer term positions, this still is going to play some role, and it's pretty low. It's just these low 2 points. The end of the day Friday and that big touchback we had, those are going to be really important later on at some point. They just are. Because it's like the first place that you found super strong support after the first big sell-off. So like you found a bottom here, so that's the bottom. You jump the creek, so that's like the lowest it comes after jumping the creek. And then you have the first major support. So those 2 points are going to be really important long term, more important than like trajectories and other junk that I might have on the chart. Yeah. So it looks like this is what we got here, which is good. I'm going to delete this though. At least for now. I'm trying to like prove myself wrong. I want to poke holes and stuff to see if I can make a case that there's going to have to be some massive pullback or something. So I'm trying to doubt the chart, if you will. This makes sense to me because of this. I might have these angles a little off. Yeah, just slightly. Yeah. So I think we've got some wiggle room down to like, frankly, down to like 5 if we just kept dropping. And this could just be like beginning of the day, end of the day kind of stuff where people are like, all right, well, I don't think it's going to go any farther, so I'm going to get out. You know, that kind of thing. Hard to say. Yeah. Yep. Somebody just mentioned the volume on Discord as well. It looks like it, but it's 1 day, which is kind of bonkers to me. And I don't really get... Hey, JMB. Good to see you. Yeah, I don't really get the... I don't get the volume. And I know you guys are going to tell me it's just because we're starting some massive move, but there's something odd about the volume here. I can't put my finger on it. The fact that it's higher today than it was that week, that whole week. Yeah, so they might be waiting for a dilution announcement to sort of shut it down and start shorting it again. But there seems to be a lot of selling, which is strange. Like this sell down has like so much volume. Hey, Chikachu. Good to see you. Get the whole gang back together. Yeah, I'm not really sure I understand. Maybe there's a high amount of selling because of dilution. Like if they're doing the offering and then people are just selling it right away, that could be part of it. I don't know what to do about that. Let's go to the daily, the cat system. Even at 10% of the volume was dilution. Yeah, I don't know. I know it could be way higher just by the nature of the setup. The setup had an extremely high amount of volume, more than we've seen historically on AMC for a long time. So the whole setup of the last several months since January has had really high elevated volume. So some operator was taking it down and doing a lot of major trades. We also know a lot of companies were buying in during that time as well when we were diluting. But I'm curious because of the lack of volume back here. This is like a substantial increase per percent in volume. This is it right here. The big candle. So single day volume is just not, I don't even think it holds a candle to what happened in January, which is strange. I'm going to do a single day volume and just check it. That's just bonkers. Try not to be nervous about something you don't need to be nervous about, but part of me gets yeah. How many halts have we had today? Has anyone like been keeping up? Because I haven't been on the chart almost all day till now. Does anyone know how many halts we've had today? That's another thing I'm curious about. I'm not seeing a lot of that talk. So GME, I think people were saying was being halted here and there, but I haven't heard a lot about AMC. Were there halts on it? GME had 8. That's strange. They broke retail for years. It's normal to be anxious now. Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is very normal to be anxious about AMC because this is a difficult stock to trade. And yeah, so yep, not the easiest. But you know, I'm always a fan of like, if you got profit, take profit. Don't worry about what other people are saying. Obviously, there's always going to be people who want more. You know, you have to do what's right for you. So I'm not going to fault anyone for wanting to take some profit, you know, because they're nervous. I do think on the big picture, this is probably just the beginning of what could be a bigger run, but time is not always of advantage to you if you're somebody that trades calls and you're doing that because it's just not, you know. And you have to remember, like, a lot of people are going to be exiting their position and volume will change for those calls. So do I think it's a bad thing to wait? No, but volatility will change some. You know, back in January, once the volatility came way up, it pretty much stayed way up. There wasn't really a lot to I mean, there's not really much to say about that. It just kind of stayed elevated for a long time. We're at 79%. The highest day we've been up is about 100% today. GMEs also seems to be taking an end of the day breather a bit. Neither of which is super substantial, but they're both kind of having a small pullback. So I think it's just sellers, people who are anxious to be out of their positions. They don't want to be holding them overnight. It's pretty normal. Last 30 minutes of the day or so. We, am I expecting like another gap up? I don't know, man. This volume is strange to me. To have a single day volume outdo a week that was a historic week for AMC with substantially more percentage move is kind of strange. So all I could say about that is I think based on this setup that this could just be a result of just having this extremely high elevated volume. But this is not, guys, this is like not even close to, I mean, we're talking about 430 million in volume today. That's insane. So this is not there's no way to fudge those numbers. This is definitely not something we've seen before. That's a huge amount of volume. And my biggest concern with that is, like, where's that going to go, Like, I can't see it as just buying if it's only doing 100%. I know that sounds weird, but there's no way around it, Is it mostly buying? Yeah, but that's why we're up. But it's also got a substantial amount of selling involved. Maybe it's like bears trying to catch a top, where they keep trying to open positions, or people are just selling because they're anxious. It's a little bit of both. It may just be one of those mysteries till tomorrow. Tomorrow is going to be a big, important day, I think, for AMC. All right, see a little bit of a mini head and shoulder here. So very, very small, but it is a head and shoulder. And this is a technical channel, so I believe in things like head and shoulders, that they play out if they get the breakdown. So that means that sellers were able to stop and advance here, and then the secondary move is the retest. So right now, there's a head and shoulder level right around 545. Now the breakdown for that's not going to be huge because this head's not like the biggest, so it's like 75 cents. So about half of that, that's 35 and some change. And it looks like it's enough to possibly get you to break out of, possibly, or close to a breakdown. So it looks like 480. So I think we might be right about, it's just going back to retest some things. And we may be right about this trend. I keep drawing it and thinking it's right, but then it's like slightly off. I should have just snapped it or used the trend tool. Yeah, so that's a breakdown of the trend. So that tells me that there's a possibility here that this is kind of like the head fake at the end of the move where you think it's going to keep going and then it falls back. Now you're getting a pretty substantial pullback. And again, you got to kind of look at where you are. In the scheme of things, if this is an S-curve, that marker that I marked earlier during the stream right here at 428, that's about 50%. So then what I can do from there is say, all right, well, there should then be some markers that, for us anyways, that give us like an idea of where about we might find another 50%. I'm just dividing it in half. That's like 496, which is kind of where we are now. And you can see like when we came up, we actually made a little bounce right there at 496. So that price target was in mind on the way up. So I think we're going to sink down to, and it's going to give the appearance, I mean, there's no way around it. It's going to give the appearance that this trend is broken. So no matter what happens, if it breaks down again, it keeps going down here, you don't get trend support, it's going to give the visual appearance that this trend is broke. And mathematically, it kind of is, but this is where you have the ability to make some judgment calls. Because I was saying earlier, if it got up to like 6 and it didn't quite get there, I actually said like somewhere between 650 and, yeah, and it looks like that's kind of where it hit resistance. I said we may see a pullback down to that 427, that region. That makes sense on a large scale because this is the place we broke down back in March. So it needs to be shown that this is now support. You can see back here 401 was that main level. We also skipped over liquidity right here, which is between 350 and 401. The strange thing about this is because we jumped the liquidity right here, 350 to 401, this is going to be kind of interesting because that's where they have that's really fascinating actually. That's where we have this kind of stopping point to the top of this range. It still jumped it. We still like went over it. It's still like very little traded there. It's a strange little phenomena. I'm not sure what the deal would be with that. Like why would we need to trade around it? I don't know, but like big picture, think about this as like a bottom. Like think of it as like a smaller bottom. So what you're saying, Booksy, is we're going down. Well, I'm saying like if you think about it like a bottom, it makes it a lot more palpable. Like you can sort of see how this is already kind of proven to reverse the trend. So that objective is done. So this is the downtrend. You broke out of the creek and you made a new high way up here at like 580 something, right? Now you've made a higher high than where we were back in February. So at this point, you've now like come above the top. And we've looked at these trends before on these kinds of bottoms, you know, and you get something like this where there's a steep drop and then you come back up, and if it makes a higher high and then finds support, that's usually where I'm like, okay, that's a good place to buy in. This is a simple example of a really common bottom that we see. It's like the even atom bottom that you see on, which I did a video about that. You see this a lot on like SPY and stuff. Usually there's more chop for the even atom bottom where it's like flat and then it drops really harsh and breaks above and then comes back down and finds support. But I think about it also as a simple waveform, like you're just jumping a creek, coming back and finding support on it. So did we get enough support that we don't have to come all the way back down to the 320 or whatever? Maybe. You know, we had that big pullback in the morning and it came back down and I think it checked it and we took off. But what remains now is, are we going to reaccumulate before we advance further? You know, because that's just the first move. And the first move is very rarely the final move. So, I mean, it happens, but it's just not very often that it happens. So if I were looking at this as like a bottom, right, where I want to see, like, what would I want to see? I don't know. I wouldn't mind seeing this come back down. And again, right where this guy broke down, oftentimes is where you find that intersection happens. So could be the way I drew it. This rotational line here could be a little bit steeper, you know. I think you could draw it steeper. But you'd see both of those. You'd see like this push up and it had to find support. And then if it had an earlier one, which is what we have here, in order for us to kind of keep going, the expectation would be, yeah, you're going to come up and pretty much do the same thing, right? Like you're going to push beyond that and then grapple on some creek, you know, opposite. You're trying to make a point, Booksy. What's the point? The point is that the supply has to become demand. So there was a heavy amount of supply here previously below 405. It looks like we may not go down that far, but I wouldn't be surprised if for whatever reason we just dropped and opened down there or something. You know what I mean? But this idea of like we couldn't come down that far is silly because at this point it's already hit the target I thought it might hit. Now where is support going to be? That's a big question. You know? Another question you could ask, or maybe you should pose, is to say, well, where was the supply here? if we don't go beneath this point, we're definitely not going to go down to 4. And I think that's a valid point as well. So I think if we got a turnaround early, it would be between, let's see what are those numbers, 474 and 515. So that's a smaller window to look at. So those were the previous tops. Those are the tops that we had back here. 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. So if it can find support between 474 and 515, I don't think the slingshot word that I have here is just because of the shallow S-curve. I did the measurements for the slingshots, and that was the first target, was 530. But I don't think if we find support over 474 and 515, I don't think we'll come all the way back down. But the next place is here, I think. 436, that's 4 to 436. So those are two places that if we were to stop now and we were to have weakness and come back down, it wouldn't be necessarily forever, but those are two spots that I would look at. And we're kind of sitting in the first one, so that's already a given. There's the head and shoulder target. It got met. That's close enough for me. I was just eyeballing it. So that was our easy target, right? Now we're coming back up. So we're going to see if it rejects here. I'm seeing a lot of volume on that buy-in. So that sell-off, we'll see. We'll see if it sticks. That volume is about as much as that final sell-off. So I don't know. If buyers can advance here beyond 519, I don't think we're going to necessarily go low and stay low for a long time. We might have just hit that early pocket down to 474, I said. So 474 to 515. I think if we find support over 515, we're probably going to, like right here, this mark. I think if we find support, we could go up. If we reject here, I don't think we're going to, I think we'll probably head down to 470 something, and then we'll see from there. Does that make sense? So this is kind of the wall, if you will, at like 515. You can see it visually. It's easy to see. That's where the trading is kind of having contention, sell-offs and buy-ins, that kind of thing. So pretty happy with the overall move today. I'm not going to be like super like picky about it. I think you should just be happy that it's up as much as it is. 70% is a big move, so everybody's going to be expecting, that downside tomorrow, and we may get it, we may not. GME did the same thing, it pushed up. It did have a 16-17% pullback, but then it didn't really camp, just did not. It came back up and broke out, and that's where I felt like we had enough confirmation that I was ready to get in. But after that point, it has this pullback, and you might have expected it based on divergence and all this other stuff, that there's a possibility this just breaks down. It still had this massive gap up. So AMC is the same kind of boat right now. It's like the first move happened. You could have a pullback. There could be 20-30% pullbacks. You could have a 15% day down tomorrow and still have a really good run on your hands. So it's just one day. I think what's confusing about it right now to me is that one day has more volume than that 1 week back in January. That's a lot. Why no AMC halts? It's moving in a way that's avoiding halts. It has to move a certain percentage over a certain amount of time in order to avoid halts. So which strike would you sell covered call for insurance downside protection? Right now, I mean, for this week, you mean? I don't know. You'd have to think about time frame, but I don't think it's unheard of that AMC can move the whole distance in a week. I guess for me, I'm thinking that seems like a natural place to stop because we didn't trade here before. And I think it's odd that we didn't trade here. And I don't know. We may not trade here, but us going all the way back down to like mid fours wouldn't be weird because of that. Momentum is one thing, right? Looking at liquid levels is another. So you can't look at liquid levels and say it has to come back down because they didn't trade it. Like, no. It's just that they've not traded it. Like I'm saying I'm talking about no one's traded it. Like very few people have traded this little pocket right here. I think it's odd. I always just kind of keep an eye on that. But then again, like very few of us have traded right above here either. There was very little trading that happened between 521 and 650. That to me, that pocket, I marked it off right here. That could be the place that we want to camp. You know, in terms of a reaccumulation, it's a natural 50% mark for the price target that I have, which, you know, the low price target's like $8, the high one's like 15. And I know that's a pretty big window, but I think it makes sense because that's like a $3 bracket around what I perceive as kind of the main target, which is probably this 12 area. I don't think that 15 is like the main target. I think that the main target is probably wrapping around 11 to 12. Because you have to imagine this is a full chart, and if you look back, that's the previous floor from the COVID mark. And so it makes sense to me that we would trade heavily around that before, you know, finding support, hopefully, at 12 and then advancing. Is 375 today's volume? It's higher than that. It's up to like 430 now. 463, 450 something. I mean, it's ridiculous high. So that's the weird thing about the volume today. You know, if you're going to make a statement, make it, and they made one with the volume. So I'm not convinced it's over. I'm not in that kind of a mindset right now. I also want to know, like, I want to think about this objectively, like where, as much as I can, where would a natural sort of plateau be before you get another leg? I still think it's probably a little bit above where we're at now, but the fact is we did stop short. You know, we stopped short at 585 or whatever, so we didn't really make that push to the 650 top, which I think is going to be a big important spot. And it looks like we stopped here right underneath it. You see that? So I don't know. If it were, it's not me, I'm not an operator, but if I were looking at this as like from an operator's point of view, I can't help but thinking things in terms of those slingshots because that's just the way my brain is wired now. And I can't help but think that it always makes sense. So I'm looking at this as a big picture slingshot, which is the way, you know, I've kind of been looking at it for like months now. But then we finally saw like that final drop in that what could be an accumulation range. That's really what changed my mind about any lower. And it's why I disagreed with lots of people who were saying that we're probably going to go lower than where we've gone. And I've not always been on that camp. You know that if you've been following me. I've been kind of more open to the idea that, all right, well, maybe we're just not low enough. And I'm constantly calling for lower bottoms, which is a pain for people that like listening to me. But I think that this particular setup is just so strong. So it looked really bullish to me. I even told Stockfather, like, I don't know, Friday. I was like, man, I just think AMC's going to take off. I just felt like it was right, but I'm all about that. But I'm also all about like just making sure that there's a reasonable target in mind. I'm gonna have to clean up my charts. I'll try to do a bigger, maybe a recap tonight so that you can see what I'm seeing. This is a mess. It's hard to see. I don't feel like I did a very good job explaining the levels as well as I could have. But this area between, trying to get this across as best I can, this area between 530 and 650, That's kind of like the big question mark area for me right now, because I think, and I think I'm right, I think that's going to be the area. We pierced it, so we went through it, but then we kind of fell down. I think that's going to be the area that's going to cause a little bit more sideways. You have very little trading done here. You can see it's between the two heavily traded areas. So we heavily traded between $12 and 6 something. I mean, we spent a month and a half here. So I think these ranges are pretty much finished, you know? And I'm not looking at VRVP. I'm just looking at that sideways action. You can just see it like 1, 2, 3 right there. You have September into October, you know, in the middle. You have October through November in the top, and then you have November through December in the bottom. So the distance, this is what I'm trying to say, like the gap, once we get over 650, you're going to see, I think, another candle like we saw here. I think you're going to just skip over the liquid. And I think the same thing applies right where we're at right now. We had right where we were today, is we had a move that went all the way from where we've already traded, and we've already traded pretty substantially, I would say, from 288 all the way up to 519. And then when you look at that and you compare it to the move, that's naturally like what we just saw. Like we went from, you know, basically 3 all the way up to the 580s, and that's it. I mean, it makes sense because all of this stuff had already been traded like sideways. We spent months trading that area, that region. You don't need to retread territory. If your operator has done a good job, they've already traded as many shares as they need to trade there. So they're going to just skip it. But, and here's the but, I think that, I really think that the pocket, and I would even say maybe 650 down to this lower one. I don't know, 650 down to like 474. I think that region is a bit more of a question mark, because if I'm an operator and I haven't traded it yet, that could be because I want to use this as an opportunity to buy it. So if they really want to trade shares, they're not going to retrade in areas that have been exhausted. Like they already traded until there was basically no volume there. So they're going to look at this pocket between 650, I know I'm saying it over and over again, 650 and 480. And I think that's reasonable. So I think this area right here could present a bit of a sideways action for us. We're seeing half of it being traded right now. But I think roughly that pocket, you're going to have more trading done because of the nature of what it is, which is a very low liquid zone. Like it's just not been traded a lot. There are some times where we like gap through them, and I always find that to be like curious, like why did we gap there over and over again? We never gone back there. That has happened before, and I think that might be because like they just find nobody's buying. It's like the orders dry up completely. It's just not a valuable place. We spend a lot more time in areas where you have a lot of people trading. So here, I think maybe if they can kind of satisfy this range sooner than later, we might see like an early buy up, and then you do the same thing, but you do it around 680, almost like the exact same pattern, right? And this is like your M cross, right? So you're jumping through the liquidity, you're doing a big sine wave through it, buying, selling, buying, selling, buying, and then you buy out through it. And I think you leave when this thing comes up to 650, and that point it's now in the previous area. And I think at that point you're going to come back down and then just take off. So could this take a whole week of sideways and up? Sure. Does it have to be that slow? No. I mean, it could be really fast. So absolutely, you know. And I talked myself through it, so I'm still in those positions. I'm kind of riding with it now. I've got some positions that did really, really well today. Most of them did really well today. It's a big day for my account. The small caps all moved. Charge point up 11.7%. This one has very little volume by comparison, but it's still making the move it needs to make, which is jumping back over that creek. I'm not going to look at this in detail, But this is the same kind of story where I think volume should start really coming in if it finds support above this like 160. IWM is up 0.2%. It's a red candle. It looks weak, but at this, because of just very little volume. But this is the weekly chart, so we'll see. I mentioned last week it looked like a pullback candle, and it didn't exactly pull back, but it didn't make a new advancement. You see that? So like it kind of slowed it down. You can see we didn't quite peak as high. So the market took a breather. So we were kind of right about that. I didn't really call for much of anything here. I said maybe it would come back as low as 202. There's still time for that to happen. It did close low. It's still green, but it's whatever. I don't know. There's a lot we could say about that, but I'm not going to get into it. GME, same deal. It's kind of consolidating. Volume's dropping a little bit on these extra candles. This is the 2-hour chart. You just have to imagine that it's probably going to need to do something similar if it's going to keep advancing. Very similar to what happened back here around 15, is that you would make a pullback and then you'd have to find support again as buyers come back in and sellers are not found. That's when you can make an advancement. Beyond that happening, yeah, of course. Anytime you have an advancing stock and the volume, if it drops, that could be a problem. This is a 2-hour chart. So I don't think the volume dropping over the course of one day is a big deal. Is there a lot less volume in the last 2 hours than the first 2 hours? Yes. But it's just a day. Day over day, this thing has been increasing, since this pullback. So I'm kind of optimistic there as well. I don't know what to make of the gap just yet. I just really haven't thought through it all the way. And I have to think about it a little bit more. But this looks really good to me. I don't know, on charge point. I think it just needs to find support. And I said it needed to come back up. The other charts I follow, so NU, I thought it was going to pull back to at least 1150. And if I'm not mistaken, I had an order that was supposed to be filled at 1150. But I don't know if it went in. Yeah, it did. I got it. So I knew it would come back at least there. It could end up coming back down further. MP, ooh, look at that. MPW broke out. So I know that a lot of y'all are like not care about this, but I care about it, and I've been talking about it a lot. And I talked about how this inverted head and shoulders should have a price target up here around 6 to 7, and ultimately, like, it's a massive widening. So if it were to find some support up here, it's jumped over its daily moving average. Hasn't done that in a long time, not since 2021. So if you're waiting for some kind of confirmation, support above 523 would be confirmation. And congrats if you happen to play that with me. I know some of you said you were jumping in. I really like this setup. I do think long-term the potential is very, very strong for this to go up 200 to 300%. It's a big trade. But short-term, I'm just really looking for that push to 7. And anything less than that, I'm not really. I mean, it's cool. It's great. I'm glad it moved, but I'm kind of just sitting on it. So I really think it's going to come all the way back up to this trend, possibly within the next 3 or 4 days. So really good movement from the stock there. Yeah, I mean, this is a crazy win for me. I've got really, really big numbers on my screen. 11%, 16%, 75%, 79% day. So I'm happy with that. I'm going to take it. And I'm going to take it with the understanding that things can change, You never know. Easy come, easy go, right? So if you're trading it, protect your profits and make sure that you're being smart about it. But you also have to just remember timing-wise. Someone asked me a minute ago, they said, well, how long do you think till you get to that higher target? Well, so this target, I mean, here, I'm going to double click, get out of this other junk. This target just happened to be met almost perfectly. But normally, like, I would give it a window, and normally you don't see this kind of a bar. You don't see a 79% day up to that target. So to me, I think it's this guy. So remember how I said these lower lines can often be really important later? This is one example that I think is worth looking at. So if you go back and you look at this lower mark, I think this is the line that the waveform pattern will try to meet up with. And you might say, well, how can you be sure about that? You can't really be 100% sure. But it basically would suggest that we reach that point, way later. Like this could be like November, it looks like it's intersecting right around, frankly, like this looks like it's intersecting right around the election. But I could look at this also and say, well, let's just say, what if it does advance past 650 and it has a big move? Maybe where would you expect that to happen? Well, the intersection with the lower targets is much sooner, $12. And this one went up and beyond, so it could be up and beyond, go up to 14 or something. This one has a $12 intersection at that bottom of that gap, June 5th. It's only a couple weeks. So that would be like us advancing here. So maybe some sideways and then an advancement. So a week of sideways, that's what I was saying on the other chart, is like you could have this go sideways for a week and be in a really good spot to run the following week. And then that gives you pretty much the same window that I've got on the screen right here. That's awesome. I'm really happy for you, Einstein. Yeah, mine didn't go crazy. It's not like I was expecting them to go crazy. Mine are up like 80% today, which is still really good. 200% on AMC, at least for now. It was like 350% earlier. So like if I had just pulled the trigger earlier, I would have gotten a couple $100 more. But you got to just remember, like, protect your profits. Think about what you want, bottom line, and then go from there. Because earning $1,000 in a day or whatever it might be is probably good enough for most people. Fear of missing out causes a lot of folks to hold positions for a lot longer than they need to. But all that being said, keep everything in its place. This is just one day's move. Huge move, but one day's move. So what happens after that is, a big question mark. And if I see this move up again and do what I thought maybe it might do here, like maybe the rest of the week is just a lot of like sideways kind of consolidation stuff. I mean, it doesn't take much to see that could happen. If that were to happen, I would be like, okay, it looks good. But will it have it yielded a larger move? No. I mean, there's nothing substantial about the next day's move being like 10% or something. And GME folks should be like the ones really talking about that right now, because these early moves were important, but they had to happen like one step at a time. Like first you made a big move, like 55%, but then you have like a half of that given away, right? And then the next move is another 45%, but it starts with this support, and that move itself was only like a 25% move. And then it pulled back again. Like every time it kept pulling back like 50%. So you have to sort of like just be mindful that it takes time. This whole thing took 6 days, so it took a week. So if AMC were to take a week to trade here, I wouldn't be surprised. Now, volume throws me off a bit on AMC, and I'm not really sure what to make of that just yet. I am a little concerned that we go for the low retest, which is around $4. I don't think it'd be the end-all be-all. We closed over 5. So to me, that's pretty strong. And we closed over this 515 top. So that's also really strong. So I think that 515, that high that we had way back in February at the last earnings, actually, that's a big deal. Like closing over that means we've closed over the range that was down there. Does that make sense? So that's a pretty important marker for us. So overall, like very positive, like very positive. I'm just I'm going to be talking about possible, pullbacks and junk. MPW will run with AMC. It's got like 20% short interest. Yeah, it's just a really good setup. So, yeah, I know, Eric. I don't know. I really feel weird about it because it dwarfed an entire week of trading volume from January, which is crazy. Like that entire week back in January has been eaten up by the volume we made today. It's the one thing I can say, and I was trying to say it earlier, maybe not so well, is I got a lot of stuff on my screen, but if you look at the trading volume that has been occurring in this particular region, and it's looking weird now because it's this giant candle, this region has been high ever since the reverse split. So like we've had an enormous amount of volume ever since about September. That volume has picked up considerably. So if you think about this as like a squeeze plus buying, potentially, you have a lot of shares that you have to give back. Like a lot of buybacks would have to happen because a lot of this volume is stacked up over this time, and that's a lot, So I don't know where Stockfather is. He's probably teaching. I would like for him to do like to see what his point and figure is, to see if it's similar to mine, if it's going to go up to about 15 or so. So if somebody sees him and ask him about the point and figure on AMC, ask him if it's a breakout, and ask him where the target is for it. I'd be curious. All right, well, tomorrow's a new day, so we'll see what happens in after hours and pre-market. I'm going to keep it on my screen, but I'm not going to be streaming at all. So you guys have a good one. Thanks for coming on and hanging out for a bit. Hope you guys made some income and profit, and then we'll catch up with you tomorrow. Thanks, everybody.